Okay, right off the bat, I just want to preface that Christopher Nolan is my favorite director of all time. I'm not shy about talking about that, and I think it's worth you guys noting that this video might be slightly biased. Anyway, I'm a new-ish father, and having a little one-year-old running around, it makes it incredibly difficult to get out and see movies like I used to. I've been waiting since this came out to see it, and since seeing Batman Begins, I haven't missed a single Nolan joint in cinemas until now. After getting the Blu-ray for my birthday last week, I finally found time to sit down and enjoy it, so without further ado, let's jump into Oppenheimer. As I said up top, I'm a Nolan fan, and just to get it out of the way, I've loved almost everything about this movie. It's an incredible piece of filmmaking, and while I don't think it's perfect by any means, I do think it's worthy of calling it a masterpiece. It was so refreshing to watch a movie that is inherently about war, politics, science, history, etc., and not be preached to about any of it. This movie trusts the viewer and allows them to ponder its story, think independently, and generate your own opinions. It doesn't persuade you to think a certain way or tell you what's right and what's wrong. It presents you with morally complex, nuanced issues and asks you to be the judge, and it does it eloquently. Before I go off on a tangent, let's go over the story. The film opens at the University of Cambridge, where Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, is a student. It's clear at this point that he is struggling to fit in as he grapples with anxiety, homesickness, and his dislike for the area of physics he is currently studying in. Heeding the advice of visiting physicist Niels Bohr, played by Kenneth Branagh, Oppie travels to Germany to study theoretical physics, a realm at which he excels in. After completing his studies, he returns to America in an attempt to expand the study of quantum physics, and he accepts positions at Caltech and Cal Berkeley. Once home, he begins to expand on his research and befriends colleague Ernst Lawrence, played by Josh Hartnett. By 1938, nuclear fission is discovered, concerning Oppenheimer as he is aware of the power that this could weaponize to disastrous effects. By 1942, Oppenheimer is approached by respected Colonel Leslie Groves, played by Matt Damon, to lead the Manhattan Project. Oppie's biggest concern is how far along the Nazis are in their nuclear research, with Werner Heisenberg leading the charge. Groves and Oppie set out across the country to recruit the best physicists, including Lawrence, and create bases of operations for research all around the country. The main one being located in Los Alamos, New Mexico, a place that Oppie is very familiar with. Working diligently, the teams overcome a host of research and experimental issues, as well as personal strifes, the biggest of them being a calculation developed by physicist Edward Teller, played by Benny Safdie, revealing that the detonation of such a nuclear weapon could, in theory, begin a chain reaction that ignites the atmosphere and destroy the planet as a whole. After Hitler's death in 1945, a minority group of scientists working on the project advocate for the discontinuation of the work, as they see it not relevant and unnecessary. Oppenheimer, however, believes the project still has benefits, as he believes that it would end the war totally as Japan continues to fight till the last man and save more lives than the war would kill. The research continues on to a successful nuclear bomb test. The bombs are dropped and Oppenheimer is praised, even though at this point he is haunted by visions of the people who have lost their lives from the weapon he created. The latter half of the film follows Oppie in his later years, having changed his stance on the nuclear program. He serves as an advisor on the Atomic Agency Commission, attempting to use his notoriety and expertise to influence political policy toward a direction of peace with the Soviets and to raise awareness of the destruction that nuclear weapons cause. The commission chairman, Lewis Strauss, played by Robert Downey Jr., resents Oppie for humiliating him publicly during a hearing and also for denigrating him during a conversation with Albert Einstein years prior. Due to these factors, Strauss seeks to eliminate Oppie's influence. As Oppenheimer's security clearance is up for renewal, Strauss orchestrates a private security hearing before a personal security board. Oppie is interrogated on his expertise, relationships, past communist ties with the board, questioning his former friends and colleagues and twisting their words against him. His clearance is ultimately denied and his reputation fractured. Strauss is chosen to be a cabinet member, and he believes this to be a shoo-in for the position, and during his Senate confirmation hearing, he is ousted by physicist David Hill for carrying a personal vendetta against Oppenheimer in the actions he took to damage Oppie's image. Strauss is ultimately denied the position, and the film concludes by showing Oppenheimer being presented an award by President Johnson as a sign of goodwill. The final shot flashes back to Oppie's conversation with Einstein. Here it's revealed that nothing about Strauss was ever mentioned. In fact, Oppie and Einstein discussed Oppie's actions in creating the nuclear bomb, in turn, sparking the nuclear arms race. Oppie admits that he believes the work at Los Alamos did start a chain reaction, just not the one they expected, and now he must face those consequences. I have to say, I was slightly nervous going into Oppenheimer, even with the trust that I do have in Nolan, because I feel too many times biopics overreach and attempt to cover too much of their subjects' lives in such a short period of time. One of the biggest offenders of this was Bohemian Rhapsody, and while Rami Malek was incredible in the role of Freddie Mercury, and I love Queen, but the biggest fault of that movie is trying to encompass the entirety of Mercury and Queen's existence into a 2-hour period. What Nolan does with Oppenheimer is focuses on key points in his life that led him down the path to his work on the Manhattan Project and the aftermath that occurred because of this choice. I also appreciated that instead of presenting us Oppie's story in chronological order, Nolan instead, in true Nolan fashion, splices in Oppie's hearing and rivalry with Strauss throughout the movie as we jump back and forth between time periods, peeling back layers of this complicated man's life. We even get the classic Nolan twist in the end. The aspect of the plot and Nolan's writing that I admire the most is the accuracy. He doesn't shy away from showing both sides of Oppenheimer, the brilliant, arrogant, revolutionary scientist and the broken, complicated, misunderstood man. We experience his loving, supportive marriage with his wife Kitty, played by Emily Blunt, but we also witness the tumultuous relationship turned affair with his former lover Gene Tadlock, played by Florence Pugh. Nolan shows us everything, and I praise him for that. He doesn't hold this man on a pedestal for recognition, but he also doesn't bury him either. He simply wants to reflect on history and convey the story of a person, a human like all of us. And it's up to us to decide how we feel about that and generate our own opinion, and that's how these movies should be made. The acting in this movie is top-notch, pretty much par for the course for Nolan films. He always seems to stack his cast and get the best out of all of them. The majority of the film is dedicated to Murphy, Downey, and Damon, and all three are on their A-game here. Murphy might be the best he's ever been, transitioning through a wide range of emotions with ease, oftentimes in the same scene. Downey is also a standout. Look, I love RDJ. I enjoy the MCU movies for the most part, and his portrayal of Tony Stark is fantastic. I don't think anyone can deny that. But if we're being honest, he's been in that same role for over a decade. And even outside of the MCU, he's sort of been typecast into that same character. This is the first movie in a long while where RDJ is allowed to showcase just how deep his acting chops are. And he's phenomenal. And he's perfect as the main villain of the film. The rest of the cast is great, but I have to say, we don't get to spend as much time with them as I would have liked. I know Nolan had to make sacrifices because this movie is 3 hours long and we cover a lot. But from what we do get of Pugh, Blunt, Safdie, Affleck, and the rest is excellent. And Hartnett. We can't forget about Hartnett, serving as Oppie's voice of reason for a lot of the film. He's also top of his game, and it's refreshing to see Hartnett back in a big budget movie again. It shouldn't be a surprise, but it's still worth mentioning. The visuals in Oppenheimer are beautiful. You shouldn't expect anything less from Nolan, especially off the back of Dunkirk, which was also visually stunning. The standout shot is, of course, the Trinity test. If you haven't already read or heard, Nolan actually created a real explosion to represent the nuclear test. The dedication that this man has to please his audiences is unmatched. Nolan's frequent collaborator, Hoyt van Hoytema, is back, and his control and direction of the camera is impeccable. I think it's pretty clear. I don't have many negative critiques for this film. There are a couple minor drawbacks that I had. Like I stated before, it would have been great if Nolan and his team could have given the rest of the cast more time to shine. I know it's difficult when making a movie of this magnitude, but I think it would have gone a long way. I think the pacing and editing could also be an issue for some people. At 3 hours, it doesn't seem like a long movie, it actually breezes by, but this leads to an editing structure that could throw some viewers off. Because we cover so much, and because everything moves so quickly, sometimes the editing can feel a little jarring and jumpy as we bounce through periods of Oppenheimer's life so quickly. Ultimately, I thoroughly enjoyed Oppenheimer, like most Nolan films. I think it might be the best of the year for me. The story, the directing, the cinematography, the acting, the writing, it's all exceptional. Nolan is at the top of his craft. And the most impressive part about this movie is I don't think you have to be a history buff or a war connoisseur or even a Nolan fan or even a dedicated moviegoer to enjoy it. Because ultimately what this story is it's a human story. It's a story about a man who his life was complicated. It wasn't as cut and dry as people think it would be. He's a man with issues, a man who's at the top of his expertise, a man who has problems like everyone else, a man who suffers, a man who has success, who has drawbacks, a man who is what he is, which is ultimately a human like the rest of us. And I think anyone on Earth can connect with that story. I know I did.